Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for all being here, being a part of the discussion, expressing your ideas and the work that you have been engaged in. But I do have to say that we sit here today in another iteration of the same hearing we've had over and over again in the 118th Congress. The sixth hearing of the same topic, a merry-go-round of Republican greatest rejections of conspiracy theories. We are here to attempt to once again discuss the same issue in a different way. Not once has my colleague, the chairman, requested any ideas from my side as to what we might agree on discussing as the weaponization of the federal government. I would say the IRS propensity to audit working class people, and especially people of color, rather than wealthy individuals, can show some weaponization of the federal government, or a book banning and censorship in schools and school districts receiving federal funding. As with many hearings, my Republican colleagues don't really want us to work together. Chairman Jordan has allowed his staff to provide the bare minimum notice for hearings without a subject or identifiable topic, without publicly announcing who the witnesses are, without even the decency to tell the minority anything. I know that we've come to think that that's normal, but that's not how Congress has always worked. This is in fact the sixth time in this select subcommittee that a hearing of ours has had the exact same name, Hearing on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. That's a broad topic and could mean anything. For the minority to prepare to engage with the majority with such a topic just is further demonstration how far we are from actually doing work. This is about platform. This is about speaking to Fox News. This is not about solving problems for the American people. We've come so far from what Congress has been, even in the short time that I've been here, which I can't believe is almost a decade now. It's shameful. So, I'll use my side in our discussion to talk about what we think is the weaponization of the federal government, what we believe to be the real threat to our democracy and the rule of law. The attempted weaponization of the federal government during the Trump administration, or even more frightening, the extreme weaponization of the federal government that the former president has told us he will do if he is reelected. Just since our last hearing, the fifth hearing, former President Trump has made more terrifying statements on the weaponization of the federal government should he have a second term. Donald Trump has said he will, quote, act like a dictator on day one of any second term. He has said he would proudly claim full credit for overturning Roe v. Wade, a woman's protection from overbearing state and her right to privacy. He's argued in court as a legal argument that he would have full immunity as president even if he ordered the assassination of individual Americans. He says he's going to lay off thousands of non-political career diplomats, replacing experienced government experts that serve with distinction with individuals whose main quality is passing a loyalty test to him. He has vowed to appoint a special prosecutor just to go after Joe Biden and his entire family, threatening them multiple times because he doesn't like them and they are a threat to him, not to our country. Trump and his followers are obsessed with charging Biden or any Biden individual for a set of wildly changing charges, with a real set of projection in that to things that he himself and his own family have done, for charges that our congressional Republicans still cannot seem to produce documents or their own witnesses to corroborate. Now, one of the other statements that I gave to you a little earlier to remove non-political career diplomats with individuals who are willing to take a loyalty pledge is also very troubling. It should be obvious to anyone that replacing these qualified people en masse with expressly political operatives of any stripe would undermine Americans' interests and is the hallmark of a fascist state. And finally, the sick, audacious notion that a president could order the assassination of an American citizen at will without a single legal consequence runs aground of every American's sense of right and wrong. That is what Donald Trump argues he can do. Not in public speeches alone that could just be campaign promises or rhetoric, but in a federal court filing where his attorneys must put the argument requested and discussed with their client, Donald Trump. Donald Trump believes as president that he can deploy, let's think about this, the American military on American soil to attack an American target, an individual, which, in this hypothetical example, has not declared any form of hostility towards the American state itself, but is merely who the president believes is not his friend or agrees with him. This idea is, and this is my own legal parlance, the craziest illegal, dictatorial, despotic, demagoguery, autocratic crap I've ever heard. Today, the chair is going to have us go through another round of claims about the weaponization that are his witnesses' beliefs about social media on the part of the federal government. The chair and my Republican colleagues on this subcommittee will ignore or try to make light of or even mock the unmistakable promises Donald Trump has made to weaponize the government on his own behalf. Where are the hearings about a former president who believes he can use the federal government to kill his political opponents? Where is the hearing about a president who believes that the most important quality of his appointments to run the greatest and most important country in the world is that they are loyal solely to him? Where is the hearing to discuss, never mind Trump, but even the idea? Let's not just make it about Trump. Let's have a hearing about the idea of a president using the resources of the federal government, the appointment of a special prosecutor to go after those he deemed to be the enemy, not of this country, not of this ideals, but of national security, but of himself. And if you don't think I am thinking this, if you don't think that this is my thought and important to me, let's take it from the word of people who work directly with the man. John Bolton, former National Security Advisor to Donald Trump. I think Trump will cause significant damage in a second term, damage that in some cases will be irreparable. John Kelly, his former chief of staff, said in a second term, it's just simply would be chaotic because he'd continually be trying to exceed his authority, but the sycophants would go along with it. It would be a nonstop gunfight with the Congress and the courts. Bill Barr, President Trump's former Attorney General, I think for people going into that second term of Trump administration, I think they have to be ready to oppose the abuse of government power. That's the weaponization of the federal government. But I don't think that's ever going to be a topic that the majority is going to bring for us. So we, the majority, will have to bring it for you. And with that, I yield back.
Without objection, all.
Thank you, Mr. Allred, the gentleman from Texas. My colleague just said, worried about Trump. The Democrats are not worried about Trump taking down speech if he's reelected. We're worried about him taking down people if he's reelected. He's already silenced many of those on that side of the aisle. So many of the Republicans that I came here to Congress with are afraid of saying half of what they would really like to say about President Trump or about a lot of other issues because has a base that they feel afraid of, that they may lose their political positions if they have true free speech in that party. So we're not worried about him taking down people's speech. At this point, he's been emboldened enough to believe that he can take people down. And that's the real fear. And that's why I have no problem with Ms. Richardson, Mr. Fang, Mr. Lykanov, is that? Lukianov, being here to be witnesses. The information they're giving is interesting. It's something we should consider. But there are other issues going on also that we can have a discussion about in this committee, and you won't. That's what's incredulous about the fact that we've been doing this 6 times, is that you haven't interspersed it with any other topic. That's the concern. But I wanted to ask the ambassador about an agency that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. And of course, I'm a little biased. I worked at the Department of Justice for a Republican president as a Republican political appointee. I worked in the Civil Division for Robert McCallum, who later became President George W. Bush's ambassador to Australia. I worked for Larry Thompson, the Deputy Attorney General, worked for James Comey, who at the time was the Deputy Attorney General. And Mr. Trump, President Trump, has said he would use the DOJ and actually attempted to use it as his own personal law firm when he was president. He tried to bully prosecutors to prosecute his friends, out of prosecuting his friends and MAGA loyalists. He pressured the DOJ to target Democrats and political opponents. He tried to force senior DOJ leadership to pursue election fraud cases in the states he lost to Joe Biden. If he gets a second term, he's made it clear that those disturbing actions are just the beginning. There are walls between the White House and DOJ, intentionally built to keep our prosecutors objective and our law enforcement system trustworthy. He wants to tear that wall with his presidency. Ambassador Eisen, a recent report claims that Trump intends to appoint a loyalist to head the DOJ's Office of Legal Counsel who will write an opinion dramatically expanding presidential immunity. Given the appellate court's decision today, what we understand about presidential immunity, can you explain to the American public what that would mean to our democracy?
It would mean danger, grave danger, Ms. Plaskett. The Office of Legal Counsel are lawyers' lawyers. They are the in-house law firm, essentially, of the Department of Justice, of the federal agencies, and of the executive branch. The opinions that they offer on the law govern what the executive branch does. I didn't always agree with them when I was in the White House, and I had to deal with them. But they ultimately say what the law is. And if they were to say that a president had the absolute immunity to order SEAL Team 6 to commit an assassination, today's opinion, as important as it is, a milestone in American law that the DC Circuit has given us, but as important as it is, it only applies to former presidents. If I may say, that's why I think the Supreme Court we don't know, they may deny cert. It's a very narrow holding today. That, unfortunately, leaves a wide field of battle, and I know that my friends do not want that kind of, on either side of the aisle, do not want that kind of power for the federal government. Very dangerous.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman give a closing statement, then maybe I'll yield to someone else to talk about it. Go ahead.
Sure, thank you. I knew you had offered it, so I jotted some notes down just to quickly make a brief closing statement. First, I do understand that free speech is very important, and we do need to protect it. I'm sworn as a barred attorney to protect freedom of speech and people's rights, and I think that's something that we should do. I am concerned, however, with the continuation of these kinds of hearings, that it does have a chilling effect, however, on individuals that are doing work to keep our country safe from cyber threats. For the record, I'd like to introduce an article written in Politico. The far right is scaring away Washington's private hacker army. Scrutiny from conservative activists and management gripes are straining the government's plan to enlist elite security pros in the fight against malicious hackers. Thank you. That's a concern as well that we need to be careful of. And I also wanted to make a correction that 3 days after the election, the individual that they asked to begin the process for taking down a tweet didn't mean that a tweet was going to be taken down. And that individual was not a political opponent 3 days after the election. He was just simply an anti-vaxxer, anti-Semitic posting, race-baiting, dog-whistling individual. I yield back.
And constitutional. And that's the concern. That's why we're having this hearing. We'll get to our guest here in a second. But with that, I would yield to the ranking member for an opening statement before we get to our witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everyone that's here at this hearing. I'm glad that the chairman opened with who instigated this hearing, which is George Hill, and what the purpose of this hearing is. At the end of the day, the purpose of this hearing is to minimize what happened on January 6th and the lawful prosecution of individuals who were engaged in that practice. The chairman wants us to believe that people are being persecuted for their political conduct rather than their criminal behavior. So basically, he's trying to tell us that everyone who's been indicted and prosecuted for January 6th did not engage in criminal conduct. That's the logic of what he's saying, and we've just come so low in this House. It's just frightening to me what people will do to try and minimize the work of those individuals who came to this Capitol on January 6th. This entire Republican conspiracy theory was launched based on the testimony of a so-called whistleblower, George Hill. He appeared for a transcribed interview last year. Mr. Hill claimed that the FBI was using the Bank of America to survey Americans. All Americans? Not all Americans. Everyone who owns a firearm, as the chairman said? Not everyone who owns a firearm. The picking and choosing of language within an entire report is just inappropriate information given to the American people. Give them all of it so that they can see the true picture. Tell half a story, you're not telling the truth. The FBI asked the Bank of America for information on individuals who fit 3 categories. People who came, that there is evidence that they were here on January 6th, that they purchased a firearm in the last 6 months, and, that's key, and, not or, and they plan to come back for the inauguration. And they know that they were coming back for the inauguration based on Airbnb purchases, hotel, RSVPs in the DMV area. And they were individuals who had come on January 6th and know that through those purchases as well. And these were not all of the people that they were looking at, but what was the purpose of this? It was to make sure that a January 6th event didn't happen on inauguration because people were talking about it. They talk, you had up there DMVs. Do we know what DMVs are? I'm going to tell you that. It's domestic terrorists, individuals engaged in domestic violence. That happens. When it's people who fit your political agenda, they're not criminals anymore, they're patriots, they're victims. They're not. They're criminals. And a jury of their peers found that when so many of them have been prosecuted in our court of law. Not by brown shirts, not by Nancy Pelosi, not by Biden's Justice Department, by a jury of their peers. And it's surprising that we don't have George Hill here today, because in the same way that their star witness on their impeachment, Alexander Smirnov, remember him, who was their key witness in the Hunter Biden impeachment probe, until we found out that everything he said was made up and he actually got his information from Russia. We don't know what's going to happen with George Hill, but we can pretty well guess based on the track record. I want to thank our witnesses for being here. We don't always agree on things that witnesses say, but we thank them for their willingness to come and give their thoughts and be questioned by members of Congress here and of this hearing. I particularly want to thank Mr. Fanon for being here with us today. I want to thank him publicly for his bravery and his willingness in sharing his traumatic, harrowing experience so publicly, so that we can understand and so that there can be truth juxtaposed to falsehoods. I'm sorry for you and all the men and women who fought on the front lines, just steps away from this room that we are in today, to protect all of us in this building, from staff, from the architects of the Capitol, to members of Congress, to the young people who were here. My experience here today is nothing compared to what those officers went through. And Mr. Fanon, while those of us on the dais were being protected in insecure locations, some of us fearing for our lives, many of us on both sides of the aisle fearing for their life on that day that they've quickly forgotten about after visits to Mar-a-Lago, I want to thank you, because you saw it all, because you were out there. You didn't hide, you ran towards danger. You went out to meet the mob. You and your brothers and sisters in blue went out and did that. And I wanted to share just a reminder of what really occurred on that day.
You guys fight the right people. Push! Try it. I got you, Mike. That's my hand. You're good. Push him back! Here, medic! We need EMTs now!
Mike, stay in there, buddy. Mike, it's Jimmy. I'm here. Mike.
That's a battle scene. That's what that is. That's a battle scene. That is not political discord. That's criminal behavior. That's what that is. And while Capitol police officers were slipping in blood on the ground as they fought their fellow officers' fight in that insurrection, those of us who were in the Capitol, those members of Congress and staff, were seeking shelter. And unfortunately, Mr. Fanon, you have met the times that we are in. You have given up your safety to secure truth. Unfortunately, many of my colleagues on the other side know the truth, but they're still seeking shelter from Donald Trump's hordes. They're still seeking shelter from the truth. They want to protect not just themselves, but their political careers, their jobs. They're hiding behind lies for that. We know what happened, not just by those videos and footage, but the nearly 1,000 convictions obtained against those rioters across an array of jurisdictions. Conviction from career prosecutors, not political hacks, with juries of the defendant's peers, everyday Americans who saw the evidence. Evidence that has been obtained by prosecutors and investigators have worked to hold these violent individuals accountable for their horrendous deeds. So, I got a lot of else that I could have talked about, but I guess we'll get to it.
Gentlelady yields back. Without objection, all of the opening statements will be included.
Thank you very much. I thought it was very telling that Mr. Knight said that, yes, going after bank records would be inappropriate, except in a criminal investigation. Ooh, criminal investigation. That's what the FBI was doing, was involved in a criminal investigation.
With a warrant, he's for it.
No, not with a warrant. It's not necessary to have a warrant. Go back to criminal procedure. You don't always need a warrant when you have voluntary authorization. And everyone who opens a bank account is told when they open their bank account that the information may be disclosed to law enforcement. Now, if we want to change that rule in the consumer protection laws, then we need to do that. But until that, they have a reasonable expectation that law enforcement may disclose that information. Because once you are banking with a banking institution, that information in that record belongs to the banking institution. It doesn't solely belong to you anymore when you are using a bank in that banking institution and they have given disclosure. Now, if we want to make it an affirmative disclosure where an individual has to specifically check off the box that allows them to be aware of it when they're opening a bank, then that's something else. But you do not need a warrant. You can have voluntary disclosure because under our law presently, the banks have possession and ownership of that information. Now, the other thing that I think you have talked about is, are we worried about that? That this is only going to happen to the on conservatives? No, I'm also concerned if the FBI were to do overreach. I am concerned with that, and I do understand that this is something that law enforcement does and that we need to be careful about what they do. I just find it very interesting that you all are my colleagues, one of our witnesses, Mr. Fanon, is not a colleague of ours and is giving his opinion as a law enforcement officer. Sir, was there something else that you wanted to add?
Within the context of this particular investigation, one of the reasons why I believe that the FBI would have sought voluntary compliance as opposed to applying for a warrant is the sheer magnitude of the event. You had literally thousands of people who participated on the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. And in an abundance of caution, and really the responsibility of the FBI and those other investigating agencies is to ensure that that violence does not occur again at our inauguration, which was only about 2 weeks after that. And so I think it wholly appropriate, as you just said, it's completely within our capabilities as law enforcement agencies to seek voluntary compliance from these institutions to investigate criminal acts or potential criminal acts.
Thank you. So there was an imminent threat on the American people, on the homeland, that being individuals who said they were going to come back and finish the job that they had started on January 6th to try and stop the placement of Joe Biden as President of the United States. Now, there's a lot of things we could have hearings on. Mr. Chair, you have not sat down with me at any point in time like we do in other committees and talk about what are the things that we can agree on, that we want to. You came to my office one time and we had a discussion. And I gave you a list of things that I would like to have a hearing on. You completely ignored me in that. Your team doesn't even give us testimony until the very last minute that they have to. You do not even let us know the subjects of hearings. Sometimes I find out about what we're going to hear, hearing is going to be on Twitter. You're not operating as a fair dealer in this, so don't try that. here in front of everybody. Well, I am concerned about things. I'm concerned about what will happen if Donald Trump does get reelected. Because on November 9th, 2023, in a Univision interview, he said, if I happen to be president and I see somebody who's doing well and beating me very badly, I say go down and indict them. They would be out of business. They'd be out of the election. On November 11th, in 2023 at a Veterans Day rally, I can't believe he was at a Veterans Day rally after what he says about those of our men and women in uniform. He said, we pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, that lie and steal and cheat on elections. He seems to be a threat to the first, the fourth, a whole bunch of amendments, but you're not going to try and have a hearing on him in this weaponization of the federal government, which we know that Donald Trump is going to use for his own dictatorial, narcissistic, failing in business, failing in presidency, failing in life self.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to yield my time to the ranking member, but I just wanted to say to Officer Fanone, I was on the House floor on January 6th. We haven't had a chance to talk, but I know you have kids. My wife is at home with our son Jordan, who wasn't yet 2. She was 7 months pregnant. And, you know, thanks to your bravery, the bravery of your colleagues, and of true patriots who defended this Capitol, I believe I got to meet my son Cameron. So I want to thank you for your service. Thank you for your bravery. I'm sorry that you've had to endure so much of this personal attacks to try and undermine what you actually did that day. But I want you to know that people all across this country know what you did, respect you, and appreciate your service. So thank you. I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Allred. I believe we all share those sentiments. I want to say that this is not a partisan issue. I heard it said that January 6th is a partisan issue. I just want to read something. A mob was assaulting the Capitol in his name. These criminals were carrying his banners, hanging his flags, and screaming their loyalty to him. It was obvious that only President Trump could end this. Former aides publicly begged him to do so. Loyal allies frantically called the administration. But the president did not act swiftly. He did not do his job. He didn't take steps so federal law could be faithfully executed and order restored. Instead, according to public reports, he watched television happily as the chaos unfolded. He kept pressing his scheme to overturn the election. Even after it was clear to any reasonable observer that Vice President Pence was in danger, even as the mob carrying Trump banners were beating cops and breaching perimeters, the president sent a further tweet attacking his vice president. Predictably and foreseeably under the circumstances, members of the mob seems to interpret this as a further inspiration to lawlessness and violence. That was the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell. This is not partisan. And the reason we kept saying this is about January 6th is because it is about January 6th. They're trying to expand the scope of what the FBI was trying to do. It was not to invade all Americans' bank records. It was not about a violation of the Fourth Amendment against search and seizure. I've been a practitioner of the law, not just a law professor, not just someone with a graduate degree from law school, but a prosecutor, an investigator, and you use the tools that you have to prevent crimes from happening. Because guess what? I've shopped in a Bass Pro Shop plenty of times. I read the Bible on a regular basis. I happen to be, in my family, happen to be gun owners. But I'm not afraid that the FBI is going to be searching my account because I was also not a rioter on January 6th. And I did not purchase a gun in the last 6 months before the inauguration. and make plans to come back to attempt to again stop the free and fair election of our government. It's getting ridiculous. Officer Fanone, Officer Fanone, you saw the violence on January 6, 2021, and you saw the individuals. You were up close and way too personal with many of them. You also, unlike many of the people here, attended hearings, trials, and sentencing of many of those individuals. Based upon the knowledge that you have, that many of us here on this dais do not, do you know what ideology the January 6 rioters embraced? And if you do, how do you know that?
I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't speak to every single individual that was there that day at the Capitol. I didn't have an opportunity to interview them. I was too busy fighting for my life. That being said, I was present at a number of the sentencing hearings regarding individuals that were specifically charged with and later pled guilty to violent assaults of myself and other officers. And many of those individuals, in their plead for leniency to the judge at sentencing, cited the fact that they had been inspired by and by rhetoric used by the former president, by misinformation from news media outlets that led them to believe that the 2020 election had been stolen and that it was their patriotic duty to, in fact, respond to the Capitol that day and fight to save their country.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning to everyone that is here with us. Thank you for joining. 2 weeks ago in this same room, we watched as the Republican majority attempted to use the congressional hearing process to intervene in an ongoing Supreme Court case. Republicans here did so by suggesting that they were concerned about how social media companies are bullied by the federal government. In truth, these arguments are operating in the interests of securing an open season where Russia and China can destabilize our democracy at will in the 2024 election. By my Republican counterparts causing people to bully social media companies, they want to allow any and all foreign adversaries to dump lies and misinformation on social media in support of a would-be fascist former president. And now you're back. Why are we back this time? We're here because former President Trump is on trial in New York. That's why we're here. On Monday and Tuesday of this week, his former attorney, Michael Cohen, delivered devastating testimony implicating former President Trump in a hush money payment scheme. His former attorney even had audio recordings of Trump talking about those payments. Whether we think the trial in New York is a good case or a bad case, the truth remains that the facts in the case don't help Donald Trump. We're here because Donald Trump knows that the evidence against him is plentiful and that the testimony of his literal, as my teenage daughter says, literal partner in crime in this case is harmful to his criminal defense and his political prospects. It's not that complicated. The truth hurts. And here's one. We all know that the former president exacts loyalty from all of his followers, and especially GOP officials and those that work for him. Blind loyalty. And this case is no different. Many of them have hightailed it to New York City to show him that they are with him and standing with Donald Trump. Trump, in turn, demands that every Republican official serve him like the incorrigible, degenerate, spoiled brat that he is, and use their positions to aid his criminal defense. And even after the embarrassment of recent hearings today, Donald Trump and his cronies don't think that the chairman is doing enough. We're here today simply because Donald Trump's sycophants have been taunting the members of this committee on the GOP side and Judiciary Republicans for not doing anything tangible to defend Trump against our judicial system. Lackeys like Natalie Winters, a Trump loyalist and an executive producer for Steve Bannon's show, have been mocking Chairman Jordan's leadership of the committee openly. As you can see up there, when the House Judiciary tweeted, "Imagine actually believing Michael Cohen," she retweeted and said, "Imagine actually believing at Judiciary GOP will do anything about it." Just as one example, on Monday, she put that tweet up, and then Fox's Maria Bartiromo and Steve Bannon himself have gotten into the act. And here they are.
Why aren't you being louder about this? Why aren't I hearing anything from this committee? I had to just ask you about it, okay? Just let me be clear. Viewers are sick and tired of hearings. They're sick and tired of letters. They're sick and tired of hearing complaints. They want action. President Trump is in a trial all day long, every day in New York City. Where is this committee of weaponization, and what are you doing about it? I just spoke with Kevin Hassett, the former chairman of the White House Economics Council, and he said, make no mistake, if we see President Trump go to jail because he violated this gag order, markets will react. Okay, Congressman, we're losing the country. So with all due respect, I'm not blaming you specifically, but it's not enough to set up a committee that's called the weaponization of federal government. That's not doing it for anybody. We want to hear more from you. We want to hear action. We want to know what the heck is going on in this New York trial where nobody can seem to come up with a crime.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm specifically doing.
Okay. No, I don't need to hear. I don't need to hear a backbencher. I'm sure you're a good guy, and I'm sure you're trying to do a lot. But it's not, as Maria Bartiromo says. And man, she lit him up.
We all heard her. It's not enough to set up a committee just called the weaponization of the federal government. That's not doing it. We want action. And that's why we're here today. We're here at the beck and call of Trump fanatics and talking heads on cable and internet talk shows in the MAGA world who, like Bartiromo and Bannon, have goaded this committee to act. Because the purpose of this select committee is, in fact, to be an arm of the Trump campaign and take his orders. And yes, we know your mad things are not going your way. Republicans are upset because the Justice Department has determined that it must prosecute Donald Trump because the allegations against President Biden amount to nothing, both at the Justice Department and even in this chamber in the House, by the very committees Republicans created to investigate President Biden. This committee and Republicans are mad because Robert Hur, himself a Republican political appointee, fully and completely exonerated President Biden while specifically outlining, a Republican appointee, outlining the reasons that Donald Trump deserved to be prosecuted and President Biden does not. They're mad because he had the gumption, I'll use that word, to tell the truth as to what facts have been shown Trump to have. The committee wants to allege the fact that Donald Trump repeatedly, and this was a discussion just in the opening statement, talking about Jack Smith and what he did with classified information. But the fact is that Trump didn't just mishandle classified information, he hid classified information and legally pertinent documents from the FBI and other law enforcement. Donald Trump ordered his aides to destroy documents and then repeatedly lied about doing so. Donald Trump even tricked his own lawyers into making false statements on his behalf, potentially implicating those lawyers in his criminal schemes. That's why Donald Trump is currently facing 40 charges in a federal court in Florida for knowingly mishandling withholding, hiding, lying, destroying classified documents in a way that put our national security at severe risk. That's why he's facing 34 charges in New York State Court for falsifying business records and making hush money payments to catch and kill information that would be harmful to his reputation and his presidential campaign. That's why he's charged with 4 felony counts, including conspiracy to defraud the United States and conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding for attempting to overturn the 2020 election. And that's why, despite the machinations and attempted character assassination of a prosecutor in Georgia, that he's charged with 10 counts for attempting to intimidate election officials while trying to force them to accept a slate of false electors, again, part of his efforts to overturn an election. Trump is charged in these cases because there is sufficient evidence to reasonably believe that he committed almost 100 serious crimes. In this country, no one should be above the law. So just for a little legal lesson, I strongly suspect the defendant may be watching, or his minions, or others. No, Donald, even a president can't shoot someone on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight and get away with it. That's not going to happen. To my Republican counterparts in the majority, you claim that you want to fight a weaponized executive branch. You do so by calling in far-right witnesses to spew conspiracies about a deep state, or by calling witnesses who have testified under oath that they literally are missing parts of their brain, and another who self-identified as a time traveler from Canada. That, my friends, is the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. To be the party of law enforcement and be led by a man currently facing 100 serious charges. We fail to understand that we are playing white knights for the most radical fringes of our society, while making frequent references to Big Brother, no less. They themselves are growing embodiment of George Orwell's 1984. Now, I know I've said it before, and if people don't know, I've been a Republican. I was a Republican appointee when some of my counterparts were still in high school. I served a Republican president. But this is not the Republican Party. This is a cult of personality where Donald Trump exercises totalitarian control. This is a subcommittee that intimidates witnesses who disagree with them, questioning Americans' loyalty to their country if they don't support Donald Trump's agenda. This subcommittee is using its platform to bully American people into believing falsehoods. Falsehoods which serve little purpose other than to scare everyday Americans, spread confusion, and attempt to re-elect Donald Trump. It's a subcommittee that is taking orders from a disgraced former president. I see members rolling their eyes, they're all upset. You don't believe me? Think I'm making up that Trump directs the actions of this select committee? You think that everyone is not jumping through hoops to please Donald Trump? Follow the facts. Who was among the select few Donald Trump called on January 6th while encouraging thousands of rioters to overtake the Capitol and steal the election? Individuals from this select committee. Members here have refused to answer a subpoena related to that call from Trump and the attack on the Capitol. Members of Congress said at rally after rally, I'm busting my tail to get Donald Trump reelected. We need to make sure Donald Trump wins. It's so important that we stay engaged and help Donald Trump get back the White House. That's what members of this committee have said. And it's our duty to call out bias and hidden agendas of the committee. It's a sham, solely designed to serve, as like we have said before, as the legislative arm of Donald Trump's re-election campaign. That's what this select committee is. This select committee's efforts are transparent. And you know what else? They're expensive. Last hearing, we talked about the $20 million this committee has spent already on this witch hunt, and they still have nothing to show for it, which explains why we're frantically calling last-minute hearings over and over again to distract from Trump's criminal trials. Just throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. Anything to try to keep Donald Trump happy. What a strategy, and what an expensive failure. I've tried to use this committee for the good of Americans. I've talked to the chairman and to others about examining moments in our nation's history when the powers of the federal government have been abused. We have seen reports that the IRS has a real problem of racial bias in its audits. A year ago, the IRS admitted that Black taxpayers are audited at disproportionately higher rates than other racial groups. Are we talking about that weaponization? Is there a discussion about that or any other hearing beyond defending Donald Trump and his election? No. I applaud the DOJ for not giving into political pressure and following the facts where they lead. No one is above the law, no matter how hard this committee tries to make it otherwise. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Now that we've finished with the novice congresswoman from Wyoming, I guess that's what we're calling first-year members of Congress now, first-term members. I don't know where that came from or what that's supposed to mean. But let's move on. Instead of name-calling, let's just do the work that the people have us here for, whether we like individuals or not, which sounds ridiculously immature. There was a discussion earlier about Jack Smith, and it was alleged that he is engaged in bias, partisan actions before. Is the discussion, I went and looked at some of the cases that he has, in fact, taken up in his long career, both in New York, Brooklyn, as well as at The Hague. Ms. Winebanks, are you familiar with former Representative Rick Renzi? He was a Republican member of the House that this Jack Smith prosecuted. Are you familiar with the name Senator John Edwards? He was a Democrat that Jack Smith also prosecuted. Republican member, Governor Bob McDonnell, when he was in the office of the prosecutor at the International Criminal Court of The Hague, many individuals from all world parties and leaders. Are you familiar, I don't know if you're familiar with an individual named Ronell Wilson.
I am not.
Ronell Wilson was an individual in New York who murdered 2 New York City Police Department officers. That was prosecuted by Jack Smith. He also prosecuted, however, police who brutalized Abner Louima. I'm sure you're familiar with that name.
I am.
So this is an individual who seems to be a prosecutor willing to go after anybody, no matter what their party is, and reviewing and investigating the information, they believe that that person has broken the law. And that's what I call a good prosecutor, having been one myself. Mr. Hamilton, are you aware that Chairman Jordan filed multiple amicus briefs in the case of Missouri v. Biden, now called Murphy versus Missouri?
I am.
And in fact, you are the attorney of record on those briefs, is that correct?
I am one of the attorneys.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. Were you provided access to the committee's transcribed interviews and deposition transcripts as part of the work and preparation of those briefs?
I was provided with, yes, information, absolutely.
And that included transcribed interviews and depositions?
I was provided with lots of information. I'm not going to get into all the details here because doing so would reveal the existence of communications between an attorney and a client.
Okay, that's fine. Do you, in your briefs, one of those instances of those briefs, you claimed that the FBI witness told the committee that the supposed Biden laptop was real, quote unquote, suggesting that the FBI had authenticated it. Do you recall that?
Do you have the brief in front of you?
Yes.
Could you read it to me? And I'll let you know if I recall it.
Okay, can you hold the time for me, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Thank you. Page 21. Is it which one? Okay. Reading from the brief on page 28 of the brief that's listed, brief representatives Jim Jordan, Kelly Armstrong, Andy Biggs, Dan Bishop, et cetera, that was filed with the court on page 28. It states that, but of course the FBI knew not just the absence of evidence suggesting any foreign connection, the FBI knew the laptop was real. Do you recall that?
I do recall.
Okay. Do you also recall that when the individual stated, the witness later said that, suggesting that the FBI had authenticated it? However, that completely ignored the fact that the witness later said in that same transcription, that same interview, that anyone who claimed that the laptop had been authenticated would be, quote, misrepresenting her testimony. Do you recall her having said that?
I can't tell you today if I recall that or not.
Okay, so your brief suggests that one particular nonprofit, well, your brief then does not give the whole story by stating that the individual said the laptop was real from the FBI, misrepresenting that it had been authenticating, when she just meant that it existed, not that it had been authenticated. Do you know that difference?
Are you disputing the reality of Hunter Biden's laptop?
I am disputing your brief, which makes it seem that the authentication of what was in the laptop was there.
But so I'm trying to understand where you're going. Are you trying?
I just asked a
are
simple
you disputing
question.
the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop?
I am disputing that it
purpose
had
of
been
your question of
authenticated
me?
by the FBI. Do you know if it had been authenticated by the
Whether the
FBI?
FBI authenticated it
You
or
said
not,
it
the
had. You
existence
said it
of
had.
it was authenticated
You
because
said it
was
had
real.
in the
What you're,
brief.
You're getting into
You said it
word
had in the
jujitsu.
brief. That's the point. Moving on. I could go literally for hours. Your brief wrongly suggests that one particular nonprofit is in fact a government entity, and even includes a graphic from that nonprofit website that was cropped to omit language stating that the nonprofit is autonomous, meaning it's independent from the government. Literally on and on. It's just like this hearing of misrepresentations of the truth. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I would point out that last week the committee deposed Mr. Brady Olson, FBI agent, who said that at the time, October 2020, the FBI had no evidence that the laptop story was a hack and leak operation. No evidence. So they had done exactly what Mr. Hamilton described in his written brief. I now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stubbe.
Thank you to the chairman. Good morning. And thank you to the witnesses and the others that are here and joining us at this hearing. Last week, after Trump insider and convicted criminal Steve Bannon demanded that Chairman Jordan do more to protect Donald Trump, and this committee answered the call. It's no accident that last week, this committee called as witness a former defense attorney for Donald Trump in the classified documents case. Rudy Giuliani's former lawyer and the attorney who has written and filed Chairman Jordan's amicus briefs to the Supreme Court to support Donald Trump's many indictments. Republicans rolled their eyes and snickered when I noted, as the ranking Democrat on the subcommittee, that the plain goal of that hearing was to influence the New York hush money trial against Donald Trump. Just so the public is clear how closely this committee is trying to link Donald J. Trump's criminal and civil matters and use this committee to act as outside defense special counsel, 2 days ago, Robert Costello, a Republican witness from last week's hearing, was called by Donald Trump as a witness for the defense in that very trial and used his same manic, rambling testimony that he gave in this subcommittee. Thankfully now, maybe the chairman and GOP members won't continue to be blasted by Fox News and other MAGA news outlets and blogs for not doing enough with the committee to support the former president. Costello got to try out his testimony. Defense counsel thought it was good enough to appear as a witness on the stand last week. I know the American people don't believe that this is an appropriate use of the $20 million allocated to this committee, holding 6 full hearings to bolster disproven lies that the government is colluding with social media companies to target conservatives, calling in an anti-Semitic, anti-vax, racist conspiracy theorist who claims a worm ate part of his brain as a witness. Others just spread the widely debunked fringe claims about the deep state or have personnel grievances from appropriate firing from their former employers that the committee offers them time to air here. This is what Republicans have made of the committee process, but I guess it goes along with their inability to effectively legislate in this Congress as well. You know, people often wonder, with my courtroom litigation background, having been a prosecuting assistant district attorney, if I enjoy these hearings. I have to tell you, every time I get a notice of a hearing for this committee, my stomach hurts because I'm disturbed by the use of this legislative time to prop up a failed individual. One individual, a loser in elections, a disastrous dictatorial wannabe in governing, a perennially bankrupt, false revenue inflating con artist in business, and a cheater in marriage even. That's who the Republicans want us to spend our time on, supporting Donald Trump, rather than the American people. Today, we're going a step further. We are somehow having a hearing to protect the gun lobby, to prop up Donald Trump's pro-death agenda, when more than 100 Americans die of gun violence every day. We have colleagues who have lost friends, classmates, mass shooters. Some of us in this Congress see the scourge of illegal guns coming across state and city lines to ravage communities with gun violence and death of youth. But these deaths happens everywhere, haunting every corner of the American experience, and without a robust federal law enforcement and ATF and FBI, Americans will die at a faster rate. I know that the Virgin Islands, my home, our federal law enforcement play a critical role in combating the scourge of drugs and guns, trafficking. Without these agencies, or with more guns available to bad people, my region where I live and all of America will be even more dangerous. Families of gun violence victims have their lives ripped apart and turned upside down in a moment. None of that is helped or made less common occurrence when we attack and undermine the ATF and the FBI. Republicans on this committee simply, it's not a matter of caring about those mass victims. Families in Uvalde identified their children by shoes because they could not identify them by the faces that they had looked at every day. It's easy to become desensitized in politics, but if that doesn't hurt you, if you don't feel anything for that, God help us all. There have already been 27 deaths from school shootings this year alone. Almost 4,000 children and teens are shot and killed every year, 15,000 more injured. Guns are the #1 cause of death in children between the age of 1 and 18. The first cause of death, guns. Not car accidents, suffocation, drowning, poisoning, cancer. #1, guns. An entirely preventable death if guns were in fact well regulated. Instead of addressing this real problem, and instead of listening to 3/4 of gun owners, 3/4 that support common sense gun safety laws, we're continuing with this. They brought us here right after Police Week in furtherance of a mission to defund and dismantle the agency trying to save our children, save Americans from gun violence. The ATF is a central agency dedicated to stopping the source of gun violence. Its agents ensure the background check laws are followed. They keep guns out of the hands of criminals. They investigate gun crimes. They prevent mass shootings, school shootings. They support local law enforcement and gun tracing and enforcement efforts. They do the vital work we so desperately need. We're going to hear today about ATF overreach, and especially about the death of Mr. Malinowski. That is a tragic loss of life. Every loss of life is tragic. Our sympathies, all of us, I believe, go out to the family. While an investigation is ongoing it's inappropriate to be drawing conclusions before the results of an investigation are released. We do know from affidavits from the court that it was alleged that Mr. Malinowski was a mass gun trafficker, and we know that some of the guns he sold were used to commit crimes. We know that ATF agents were serving a legitimate search warrant. Beyond that, we await the results of an investigation, and this committee shouldn't seek to influence that. Let's not be mistaken. Republicans are not here today because they're concerned about the tragic loss of life during a police raid. You know why I know that? Because they have not uttered a word about a Florida deputy shooting and killing Senior Airman Roger Fortsman in his apartment just a week ago. You know why I know that? Because they don't say anything. They don't say the name Breonna Taylor, who in 2020 was shot and killed in her home through an inappropriate police raid. They don't want to talk about the gun violence impacting communities or how across the country, a Black American is shot and wounded every 11 minutes. They don't want to talk about the interstate gun trafficking that's fueling violence in Illinois, where on an average someone is killed every 6 hours with a gun, and where Black individuals are 38 times more likely than white individuals to die by gun homicide, triple the national average. So while homicides dropped by 13% in Chicago last year, that doesn't mean that people aren't still dying. Those victims deserve to be more than statistics. We don't talk about that. They don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about other kinds of police raids. They want to talk about this police raid on Mr. Malinowski because it fits their narrative about how to dismantle the ATF. That's what this is about. Don't let them fool you. They don't care. And when they do care, it's not about every American. It's only about a specific type of American that they're concerned about those deaths. Because I don't hear those other names being called by them. Ms. Sampson, Mr. Graham, I want to thank our witnesses for being there today. Ms. Sampson, your expertise and vast experience in gun violence prevention spaces is truly impressive. I'm confident it will be invaluable as we examine those issues here today. Mr. Graham, I'd also like to thank you for your more than 37 years of public service at the ATF. I guess I will be enlightened as to why you've begun getting paid by the very gun lobby fighting ATF's work. I want to thank the other witnesses. I would ask all four of you today in your testimony answers to remember something. As we engage in this hearing, in the 3 or so hours we'll be sitting here before us, more than a dozen Americans will lose their lives to gun violence. It's a somber but necessary reminder of the gravity of what we discuss here today and what's really at stake. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back without objection. All of the opening statements will be included in the record. I will now recognize the gentleman from Arkansas to...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Thank you to our witnesses for being here. I especially like to thank witness, former U.S. federal prosecutor and former United States Department of Justice Attorney Shan Wu, my colleagues. Thank you to the American people watching around the country for joining another hearing of the Congressional Committee to undermine American independence and to defend Donald Trump. From the early days of our nation's formation, our founding fathers were very clear. The upkeep of democracy requires constant proactive maintenance. In his letters to fellow founding father and his political opponent John Taylor, then former President John Adams wrote, "Democracy has never been and never can be so durable as aristocracy or monarchy. Remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. Those passions are the same in all men under all forms of government. When unchecked, produce the same effects of fraud, violence, and cruelty. American democracy has always been a question of progress, not finality. Democracy has been given to us with the blood, sweat, tears, and efforts of Americans who came before us, who struggled long and hard to build and protect every democratic institution we have. Indeed, our country's dark past, the very foundation of our economic juggernaut on the world, was premised on a sick institution called slavery that some now want to even erase. This democracy that our ancestors struggled to bring us all into, these rights, some of which some Americans do not even have all of, are fragile. Remember that the great Republic of Rome was destroyed. Greece was destroyed. Germany of the early 20th century, destroyed. Spain. These great empires are gone. Human history is laden with examples of great nations, republics, and democracies that were once beacons of human progress and eventually destroyed by hubris, autocrats, and the rabid ambitions of an empowered few. Falls do not happen overnight, but the signs are there if you want to see them. In those republics, those democracies, slowly but surely, rights are stripped away. My fellow Americans, that's happening here in this country. The right for a woman to choose what to do with her body, stripped away in 15 states. Immigrant children being stripped away from their families. The gains of blacks for fair representation, voting rights. Recognition of the historic lack of creating an even playing field, stripped away. Slowly but surely, the structures, the laws, and the institutions intended to make the nation great have been and continue to be eroded. Not to mention the souls of the human race and minorities being eroded every day by injustices. We have a blueprint that we can see how that's being done. Project 2025 plans to upend structures, institutions, and the basic rights that have supposedly been afforded to Americans to make it great. It's a playbook for Donald Trump's second term and a plan for the destruction of America as we know it. Despite flashy headlines printed over American flags and the likes of obnoxious men who give loud speeches about their love for making America great again, Project 2025 delivers no such thing. Project 2025 will slowly but surely strip away our rights. I've asked for a hearing about Project 2025 because I believe it is a dire warning to us all of an individual and others around him's desire to weaponize the government for their own empowerment. It will rip our experts out of agencies to be replaced by sycophant political appointees. It will strip women of even more healthcare access and rights. It will further dehumanize undocumented immigrants and punish their family members, even those who are American citizens, for daring to be associated with them. It will restrict free speech in schools to only allow far-right approved agendas and curriculum. It will erode our freedoms, all under the vague guise of making America great. And yes, because it is a grand Republican plan, Project 2025 calls for severe cuts to Medicare and Social Security. I'm not just saying that. The authors of Project 2025 are saying that. Here's a video
In July of
outlining that.
2025 believe that a woman should be able to have an abortion if her doctor says that she needs one? Is a yes or no question.
Abortion is not health care.
So
Abortion
that is a no?
Murder of a human being.
We're also going to have teams, because we can multitask, to deconstruct the administrative state and to go after criminals and the traitors in the deep state. So suck on that.
We need to have the biggest mass deportation system ever in the history of America, because it is unjust and illegal and evil that more than 10 million illegal aliens have come to this country. There are great plans using the Department of Homeland Security to return these people back to south of the border.
The best thing that people can do right now, if you're a young person, is get involved in one of these things like American Moment or Project 2025 or the Trump campaign. We got to fill up the White House with Reuters.
Project 2025 is something that's going to transcend the next 4 years, the next 10 years. It really is, for the first time in the history of the conservative movement, the apparatus for policy and personnel. We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
Playing patriotic music, claiming to love freedom, demonizing every group in the nation that is not like you, will not protect you and your civil rights. The Project 2025 playbook is a plan to give Donald Trump the powers of a dictator, just as he wants. That's the plan. This is the man who threatened to send the Department of Justice after political opponents. Trump even sent his lawyers to the Supreme Court to argue that he should have criminal immunity even if he uses the military to assassinate someone who simply disagrees with him. We heard his Secretary of Defense say that he asked the military to shoot people because they were protesting. Yes, that's what his defense secretary said on TV, and there's recordings of it. This is the man who jokes about being a dictator just for a day and teases the idea of a third term for a US president. This is a man who wants to implement sycophant loyalty tests. He's a man who will fire every employee in every agency who upholds their pledge to serve their country over the president. Donald Trump is a clear and present danger to the continuation of American democracy as we know it. We are using this congressional committee for the third time to attack a state-level felony conviction of a former president by a jury of his peers. Republicans on this committee have used $20 million of federal taxpayer dollars to deliver Trump more power and attack his rivals. They are threatening public servants far outside their legal jurisdiction and even threatening private citizens who dare not to give Trump what he wants. The reign of Lord Trump has already begun, and he isn't even in a second term. It's vital we remember our founding fathers' principles and that we see Project 2025 for what it is, a Republican plan to slowly but surely strip away rights. This is about freedom versus fascism. I beg every American watching, don't be fooled by plastic patriotism. Don't be fooled by those rhetorically referring to freedom without the substance to back it up and without any care for all people's rights. A true understanding of freedom comes from respecting the sacrifices of our ancestors, our democratic institutions, and a robust rule of law. Our country is not and has never been perfect, but our country is great, and it's our duty to keep it that way. Our country has never shied away from improving our flaws, but what is being promoted is a distraction. It's counterproductive and threatens years, decades, centuries of progress. Let's keep moving forward. Let's not go back to the dark times. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back without objection. All of their opening statements will be included in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wu, did you conclude your thoughts on that subject?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to give you time if you needed it. Thank you for your analysis of what's happened in the court case in New York. And Judge Wilson, it's good to see you here. I just wanted to give a shout out to a fellow Bronx District Attorney alum as well.
Thank you.
I did want to state for the record, this discussion about homicides in New York City and the lack of prosecutorial action by the district attorney in the county of New York, that in Mr. Bragg's first year in office, shootings in Manhattan declined by 20%, homicides declined by 16%. And the data from the NYPD shows that the rates of virtually every index of crime are lower in Manhattan for the first quarter of 2023 than they were at the same time last year. So while we may not like him having prosecuted former President Trump, I think it's false to say, based on the data, that Manhattan is suffering from a rise in violent crime. That is not, in fact, factually the case. Would we like to see it further? As a born and raised New Yorker, of course. But what it is not right now is a place with a crime spree. One of the things that I talked about earlier today was Project 2025. I've shared with the chairman my concern about this plan and the fact that this, I believe, fits squarely within the tenets of this committee to have a discussion about it, to go to those individuals, the authors of this plan. Over 1,000 pages have been written that make up the Project 2025 by the Heritage Foundation, which they and its authors state is the plan for day one after a Trump second-term presidency. Mr. Wu, looking at Trump's playbook, that playbook being Project 2025, which is authored by individuals that are within his prior administration, how would it hurt Americans if these proposals were made into law?
I think one way that I've touched upon is the removal or decimation of the career civil servants, I think is very dangerous. Also, some of the other examples, the idea of removing the general counsel at the FBI to replace that with the political appointees counsel. Again, you lose the experience and the context of that position. And similarly, trying to do away with the 10-year term for the FBI director, which is there to ensure that they can be in place over the course of different administrations. I think all of those, particularly at the Justice Department, would gravely hurt the integrity and steadiness of the department.
I agree. Having been a political appointee in the Bush administration at the Department of Justice, working under the Deputy Attorney General Larry Thompson, and then under James Comey, who could have fared without a David Margolis, having been in that office, being someone who had been there since the time of Kennedy. He came in as an honors graduate from law school and provided consistency across the board to multiple administrations. Under Project 2025, if this individual did not, if an individual like David Margolis had not passed the loyalty test, would he still be have that position?
No.
One of the key tenets is also to defeat the anti-American left. That's a quote. Trump has promised to root out liberal prosecutors. Individuals on this committee have used the power of Congress to go after anyone who dares to indict Trump on crimes and publicly attack judges who rule against Trump or his defense team. Does this look like a fair and impartial system of justice to you?
No, it doesn't. I think it undermines the democracy.
As a former federal prosecutor for many years, was it your experience that prosecutors in liberal jurisdictions approach the criminal justice system with an anti-conservative bias?
No, it was not.
And what was your experience?
My experience was that federal prosecutors around the country tended to be very independent-minded. Sometimes they would butt heads with what we call Main justice. But I pretty much never have seen an instance that I would identify as a politically motivated federal prosecution.
Thank you. And I'm not going to go into blocking financial aid for American college students if their states permit kids like Dreamers to access in-state tuition, getting rid of school lunch programs, summer programs, taking aim at free speech and free thinking in American universities, aim at renewable energy, and what will make American women second-class citizens by taking a closer to a national abortion ban and restricting access to women's health care and abortion drugs across the market. This, again, Mr. Chairman, I believe is a document that we, along with others throughout Congress, need to take a closer look at. I yield back.
Lady yields back. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Biden's DOJ has utilized their power and weaponized the justice system to go after his political opponent. From Florida.
Member for as much time as she'd like. I'll give you 6, 7 minutes, 8 minutes if you'd like, and then or a closing statement after that, and then I have a couple more questions, and then we'll be adjourned. Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. I don't know what to do with all that time. Kind of freaked me out when you said that. I started,
You can always yield it back to me.
Oh, no, I don't think I'm not giving up what's given to me, I'll tell you that much. You never know when you can get that, but I appreciate it, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here, each one of you. Thank you for expressing your ideas and your thoughts. And I did want to ask some follow-up questions, though, to some of those. Mr. Inspector General Horowitz, my colleagues across the aisle have said that the Inspector General found that the FBI intentionally weaponizing the security clearance process to purge conservatives from its ranks. Mr. Inspector General, did your office find that the FBI has a pattern or practice of misusing the security clearance adjudication process to purge certain FBI employees?
We have not made such a finding.
Okay. And also, there were allegations made that the FBI has weaponized this, any findings that it was related specifically to individuals who might have expressed sentiments with regard to January 6th. Did you find that?
We haven't made such a finding. We've actually, Congresswoman, had complaints come in from both sides on these issues. On one side, complaints about field offices not taking action in January 6 cases, and on the other side, complaints about offices that did take matters in January 6 cases.
So, as usual, it's across the board of the political
We have
spectrum.
complaints from whistleblowers on both sides on that issue.
And that is par for the course you have found in the FBI and in your position over hearing from your other Inspector General officers that complaints may come from both sides of the political spectrum.
I've certainly seen, with regard to the DOJ law enforcement components, issues coming from various perspectives. I will say non-ideological, ideological complaints across.
What about religious? Have you made any findings that the FBI security clearance process targets Christians?
We've not made such a finding.
Or targeting military veterans?
We've not made such a finding.
Thank you. You know, I understand my colleagues' concern that it would appear that Democrats are not taking the issue of whistleblowers seriously. And I think we do. We have a committee for that, the Oversight Committee, for which when I was a member of the Oversight, that's when I first met Mr. Horowitz, was in having oversight over different agencies and questioning you about some of your findings there, some of which, when I first came to Congress, were targeted against a Democratic administration, at the time, the Obama administration. We've gone through a Trump administration, we're now in a Biden administration, and so the vagaries of political persuasion, you've seen them all. But I think the reason that the Democratic members have been bringing up Project 2025 and President Trump is because it presents a global threat, a true weaponization of offices and of a position against the American people as a whole. We see places like North Korea, Hungary, Iran, now Venezuela, where those citizens could not have imagined 20, 30 years before, potentially, that they are living under a dictatorial rule. I went to school with individuals, I'm dating myself, in the early 80s with students who had fled Iran. I have been around young people in undergrad who have fled North Korea. And the notion that anything like that could happen in this country seems so antithetical to our thinking. But we cannot drop the ball in when we see an individual or a group of individuals who have power trying to take that control. And it is our opinion, many of our opinion, that Trump, for his own purposes, has now joined forces with individuals who have offered Project 2025 as a means to an end for each one of their own desires. I would ask to submit to the record a CNN article, Trump claims not to know who is behind Project 2025. CNN review found at least 140 people who work for him are involved.
Objection.
Thank you. And in this article and in other places, we will see the nexus of relationships between the president and individuals who have written this. 6 of his former cabinet secretaries, 4 individuals nominated by the former president as ambassadors, his first deputy chief of staff, my former colleague Mark Meadows, and also his longtime advisor, Stephen Miller, who were advising Project 2025. Federal Communications Commissioner under President Trump, Brendan Carr, Lisa Laurenti, who was a delegate to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, all wrote components of Project 2025. We have the American Accountability Foundation putting together a roster of current federal workers it suspects could impede Trump's plan for a second term. I would direct your attention to what we have up there on the screen, which shows so many associates who have, in fact, contributed to the transitional plan for a presidential Trump next term that are part of his orbit. Paul Dance, top official in Trump's White House. We have Ben Carson, former HUD secretary. Christopher Miller, acting Secretary of Defense. Peter Navarro wrote a section defending the former president's trade policies. This has been drafted as the next conservative president's last opportunity. The last opportunity for what? Not the America we know now, a different form of America, one that meets the demands of specific individuals, not all of us. One women that does not include us having complete autonomy of ourselves. One that puts a form of Christianity that may not be my form of Christianity. That's why we have a separation of church and state, so that we can all worship our God as we wish. That's not what Project 2025 is looking towards. Today you may be part of it. Tomorrow you may not be. Today it may help you. Tomorrow it may not. I know I'm on the front line. I know my community's on the front line, but tomorrow it may be yours. Next week, next month, 180 days he's given himself. 2 years from now, it may be your son, your daughter, pointing in the military, pointing a weapon at their fellow citizen, at their brother or their sister who are protesting on the streets of America. Because yes, in Project 2025, it allows the president to direct the active military to come to the streets of the United States against those that he deems as political rivals. That's in Project 2025. Those are the things that are in there against us as Americans. And that's the reason why, Mr. Chairman, we keep talking about it. Not because whistleblowers' issues are not unimportant, but because this is a clear and present threat right now to the American people that we need to join forces with and stop. So I want to thank you for the additional time. And while we're on the recess, God bless you and your family. And I pray safety for all of us as members, all people who have spoken out, and individuals we may not agree with one another. But I pray that this election goes safely and that we are all back here again to continue the people's business.
I agree.